This is Professor Emin Günsürer from Cornell University, founder of Ava Labs and co-founder of Bloxroute, and you're listening to Milk on CoinSpice.
You're listening to Milk, Soothing Crypto's Burn, with host C. Edward Kelso from CoinSpice.io, your home for just spicy crypto things online.
What is really going on, crypto savages? This is your host, C. Edward Kelso, editor-in-chief out at CoinSpice.io, back with another episode of Milk, Soothing Crypto's Burn. I've got Amaury Séchet. He's, of course, lead developer for Bitcoin ABC, which is the team all about bringing electronic peer-to-peer cash to the world in the form, of course, of Bitcoin Cash, or BCH. He has, in the last year especially, become a giant lightning rod. And after this contentious hard fork come chain split of last November, so about 2 months ago, I thought it was really important to get him right now. It's a transitional time for everybody in the space, but especially for Bitcoin Cash. And seeing as how he has a disproportionate impact on what happens with that project, whether you're an investor, whether you're a code dilettante, just kind of a general enthusiast, or someone who's interested in the politics of the space, you have to kind of know where Séchet is to get a sense of really what's happening. And so I was sort of taking his temperature throughout the actual episode here, and you'll get a sense of why. Just to put it all out there, I am a huge fan of his. I think he's done a lot of great things, and so I proceed that way. You'll get a sense immediately of how I feel about him. And then we get into all sorts of different topics, from the yellow vests. He's actually in France right now, just outside of Paris. We talk about, of course, the his being a celebrity, and then we transition into all the different things that are going on with Bitcoin Cash right now. The avalanche weaving into the code, where he thinks it could be going ultimately. And I talked to him a little bit about the lawsuit as well. So I try to touch on everything so that you have a document. You have something right now that marks this time in at the beginning of 2019 that you can refer to and use as you'd like. Again, I think it's a great episode, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Here is lead developer for Bitcoin ABC, Amaury Séchet.
Well, first off, man, this is an honor for me. I've always wanted to. Had we ever met at a conference or something, I sort of rehearsed this in my head. I just wanted to go over and shake your hand and just say thank you. Thank you for, I think creator is maybe a little kind of strange to say to you, but thank you for the work of way back in, it seems like so long ago now, in mid 2017 and before then, for Bitcoin Cash, for putting up the good fight. You've taken a lot of heat, and I have. Yes. I exist. My whole job really exists on your coattails, and so you have no idea the effect you've had on my life, and how positive an impact it's been. So I wanted to start right off and just say thank you, man. Thank you for all that you do. A lot of people really appreciate you.
Okay, so that's great to hear, and thank you too, right? Because even though I made like the protocol specification and stuff like that and coded not all of it, but a good chunk of it, none of that is working without the community around it. So people like you are also doing important job.
So you're in France, and this sounds stupid to ask, but are you somewhere close to Paris?
Yeah, I'm not in Paris though, but I'm in the side, not too far away.
So how are you finding the yellow vest protests? Is this something you're interested in, or is it because it gets a lot of press out here? A lot of media in the United States is covering it. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so first you got to realize how the media is. The media like to, okay, to begin with, the yellow vest is some real stuff, right? But the media is going to show you all the most outrageous part of it.
Sure.
The more mild part of the movement is never really shown because it doesn't do as much audience. So as a result, people tend to have a bit of a biased idea of what's going on. It seems much worse than it actually is when you look at foreign media mostly.
But you're generally you see this as a positive.
So I don't know. There is a lot of pro and cons. Here is the thing: like French people are very statist, like generally speaking, and so even though they are very pissed off at the government, they are still in that mindset that you need like a better guy to make the decision, right?
Yeah, we had that here with the Occupy movement. It drove me crazy.
Yes.
Occupiers. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So in that sense, it's quite similar to the Occupy movement. The reason why they are protesting makes a lot of sense, and I think there is a lot of legitimate grievance there. But the solution that they are asking for, in my opinion, are very likely to make the problem worse and not better.
That's interesting. It's funny because just a couple of weeks prior to it breaking out and really kind of catching fire, in the U.S., the press had just bestowed this love on Macron. He's the new golden boy. He was talking shit to Trump. He was doing all the right things, checking off all the right boxes. And 2 weeks later, he's a villain. He's awful. They completely changed it there. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's very much what the media is, right? Like some dude is gonna be a hero one day and he's like the worst guy in the world the other day, because that's sell more than saying like there is something it does well and some other thing it doesn't do very well, But that's much more mild impression of it, and it doesn't sell as much clicks and ads and newspapers. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you're gonna have like he's the hero. He's gonna like revolutionize, so president do their thing, and then a few weeks later it's like, oh, it's gonna be killed by people. The truth is somewhere in between.
Yeah, it was shocking. I mean, I've seen this cycle many times, but it was interesting because he could do no wrong. He was just he was the goal. He was the de facto leader of Europe for at least 3 weeks, and then boy did that change. But anyway, well, on the personality thing and on the media thing, now I kind of get the sense, again, we've never met, but we know really a ton of the same people, and we travel in the same circles, philosophically, economically, but I get the sense you're not all that interested in the fame part, the crypto celebrity part. I think I get the sense like you're a very good speaker. You're obviously bilingual at least, and you're able to convey rather ideas very, very well. But I get the sense that we kind of have the media, the crypto space has to kind of yank you in to self promotion or talking about your personal stuff. How has it been as an engineer, as a developer, as a builder, someone who has this objective measurement and metric tools to see whether things are done? How has it been having been sort of thrust into the limelight, into celebrity and fame? What is it as painful as it seems?
So there are good aspects of it, but you are correct that there are also various negative aspects of it. So yeah, there is that need that you need to be communicating what you're doing and all of that. But at the same time, every time you're doing that, you are not building, and I'd rather be building than doing that. So it's always a bit tricky. But
you'd much rather be writing code or building.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I get that sense.
What it turned out is that if you don't do it at all, then other people are gonna do it for you, and it's even worse than not.
Right.
And so, yeah.
One way or the other, it's gonna happen. Well,
Yeah.
all right. So, obviously, you came into my orbit and the community's orbit. I would say more prominently leading up to the historic fork in my view, the only real successful fork from Bitcoin Core, and then you really came into the debate this November and leading up to that, and you were all over the place. There were lots of thoughts about you, one way or the other, and the dust has somewhat settled. I think it's we now have a split. There's definitely at least on our side of things, there are now two experiments happening. You have the sort of the government friendly version out there that's promoting regulations and rules, and they're suing everybody. And then you have
I don't know, that's very strange. I'm not quite sure this is what they stand for. Like this wasn't the narrative for a very long time. It's came up very much recently. So you see this effect where the narrative is constantly changing. And when you see that, we saw the same with Segwit maybe 2 years ago.
Right.
People tell you, okay, we need it for reason X, and then actually this is reason Y, and it changed. So when that happened, most of the time, sometimes genuinely people change their mind, but when that happened consistently again and again and again, you should assume that there is some actual motive that people don't want to tell you.
And that's also being bandied about quite a bit. How are you feeling now with it relatively settled, and Bitcoin Cash now hopefully can go about its merry way? Are you hopeful? Are you kind of in between? Where are you?
No, I'm actually more hopeful than I was during most of the year. I see much more upside, even though we took a lot of damage. I think most of the damage is behind us now, and it allowed very much to, it allowed very much to see who was actually behind, shared the vision and who is behind the project. So I think now we have a much stronger group of people working together, and much higher quality of discourse. Than we had before with people working on BCH.
Yeah, I'm getting a sense of that as well from what I'm hearing and kind of watching. I want to ask because I think a lot of people want me to ask, and I have to restrain myself because I'm trying to be somewhat objective, but it's almost impossible. This fucking lawsuit, this thing that popped up, I just find it so. I'm not even talking about the merits, right? I'm just talking about this idea that we're now going to start suing developers, that there are people here that are going to go after because they lost or they perceived to lose or whatever, and they start this stupid war, and then all of a sudden this lawsuit pops up. How are you? I don't want to get into too much of the nitty gritty. If you don't want to talk about it, we can just move on. But how are you dealing with this? Like, is this putting more stress on what you do, or are you just like moving on?
Yeah, not much. So first, there is this is a case that is ongoing. So I'd rather avoid saying too much about it. I can say how I feel about it and this kind of stuff, but not. I'd also avoid talking about the case itself. As it turned out, there is a lawyer that is handling that for me, and so myself, I don't have that much to do about it. It seems that the accusation doesn't have that much of a leg to stand on, so it's probably gonna be one way or another. I'm not too worried about the result. Obviously, this is never done, but I'm not too worried about it. But I think it's kind of a confirmation that, there is really a difference of vision and just different worldview that are completely incompatible.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, well, I thought I at least should touch on it. So let's move on to what you're doing now that the dust has settled. Now that there's a clearer path ahead of you. There's less contention, more the dialogue has been elevated, as you say. Can you talk to us a little bit about someone called your code writing? I rarely hear this. Someone said that they looked at some of your integration of Avalanche into the protocol. They called it beautiful code writing. I've not heard that before. So can you tell us a little bit about Avalanche and how that's going to or will or is impacting Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, sure. So the primary goal of Bitcoin Cash is to have the best monetary property, technically achievable, right? And one of those property is that you want to have a transaction with very fast settlement, as fast as possible, right? So when you send cash to, when you give cash to some person, actual banknotes or coins, that person, receive that, put them in their wallet, and it takes them a few seconds, and here you go, the transaction is settled, right?
Right.
And when you use credit card and stuff like that, typically it takes like 2 to 3 months to settle a transaction. But during those 2 to 3 months, you still have a very, very high degree of confidence that the transaction is going to go through. And with Bitcoin and also blockchain mechanism, you're in that weird spot compared to credit card where after, 10 minutes or, depending on how long it takes to find the block, but after, say less than an hour, you have a degree of confidence in the transaction that is much higher than what you would have with credit card, right? But during those first 10 minutes or so, you have a degree of confidence that is much lower. And even though we don't see a lot of people exploiting that right now, you can also show with research that you can do double spend with a fairly high degree of success rate. So as far as I know, on BCH, it's somewhere in the 20-25% range if you want to do it and to do it. On BDC, I'm not quite sure what the numbers are, but I know it's very easy, especially when the mempool is full. On BSV, people have been able to identify the miner and do it much more efficiently as well. There is some Spanish guy, I can't remember his name right now, but there is some Spanish guy that found a way to do it with like 90-something% success rate. So this time, very much like before you find the block is something that we need to improve. And it's a bit difficult because fundamentally the problem you need to solve is that when you have two transactions that say something that conflicts, so say there is one transaction that says I send money to you, and there is another transaction that says I send money to someone else. Well, because the network is distributed, right? When you have one authority, the authority can say, okay, this is the one that is correct, right? So if you have Visa, PayPal, or MasterCard, or whoever, they can say, okay, this is the transaction that I consider valid, and this is the one that I consider invalid. And because we have one authority that decides, it's very easy to decide. But we have a distributed system. And on a distributed system, the transaction, they take some time to propagate. Some node may be honest, some node may be dishonest, right? And so some nodes are going to say, okay, I consider transaction A to be the correct one. And some other nodes may say, I consider transaction B to be the correct one. And there is really no way to decide which one is more true than the other, because there is no, single point of authority that can decide, right? Everybody has his own, like when I say everybody, every node software that machine have its own opinion of which one is correct. And so what happened, we reconcile that, is that when there is a miner that find a block, whatever is in the block is everybody is going to switch to that opinion, right? So if transaction A is in the next block, then everybody that think that transaction B was the correct one is going to say, okay, I was wrong, and I'm going to do like it is in the block. So this works on the time scale of minutes, but faster than that, it starts breaking down, and there are various reasons for that. But the main, like the intuition behind it is that it takes time to propagate a block. And so if you have more blocks that, say say a block takes 1 second to propagate. If another block is found during that time, then you have a race between two blocks.
Right.
And you need to wait for the next block to, do a tie break. And so if you start making the block time very short, what happens is that there is a lot of block that is found when other blocks are starting to propagate, but they have not finished propagating. And what happens is that you have more branch that create themselves more than the network is able to reconciliate by finding new blocks. And so you have total consensus failure. So on the whole blockchain way works on the timescale of minutes, but doesn't work very much on the timescale of seconds, which is what we would like to have. And so we actually did a lot of research way before the Avalanche paper came around, but really the Avalanche paper made a breakthrough in terms of consensus algorithm. And it's actually very elegant and very simple, but the basic idea is that each node, consider transaction A and transaction B valid, and it's gonna do very much like the scientific method, right? So what is the scientific method? The scientific method is you make a statement, an hypothesis, right? You decide, okay, transaction A is true, right? This is your hypothesis. And then you're gonna run an experiment to test that hypothesis. And the experiment goes as follows. If I consider transaction A to be true, but if this is correct, then if I poll several nodes, they're gonna all tell me that transaction A is the main one, right? So you do that and you get the result of the experiment. And if the experiment is conform to your hypothesis, you increase the confidence you have in the hypothesis, right? And if the experiment say this is wrong, then you change your hypothesis. And so the nodes are doing exactly that. They query all the nodes and they get the result, and three things can happen. One is that the result is conformant with the node hypothesis, so it increases the confidence that transaction A is the real one. Most of the nodes that are query say, no, it's B. And so in that case, the node say, okay, the experiment doesn't conform to my hypothesis, so I change my worldview, and now I make a new hypothesis, and that new hypothesis is transaction B is the real one, and then I start again. And the third option is like, some nodes say A, some nodes say B. The results are very mixed up. And so in that case, you conclude that the experiment is kind of inconclusive and you need more experiments. And so you can demonstrate that when nodes are running that algorithm, they are going to converge very quickly toward the same set of transactions. Even if a portion of those nodes are actually, what we call Byzantine, which means they are actually, not participating in good faith, but participating in a way that try to cause problem with the network. And so what you can do is that you can run that protocol, and that protocol can tell you within seconds if transaction A or transaction B is the real one. And then once this is decided, you can essentially choose transaction A. And then if you have a block that is mined with transaction B in it, you can say, okay, that miner is trying to take a bribe because everybody decided with Avalanche that transaction A was the real one. So we are not going to pick up that block and we're going to offend it essentially, which guarantees that within seconds it guarantees what, essentially what is going to confirm and what is not.
And so you it sounds like you guys are all in for integrating Avalanche. Would that be right to say?
I'd say we are all in integrating pre-consensus. This is something I've been talking about for a very long time. Avalanche is a form of it. If there is something better that came along, then we can do that. But it seems that right now, this is the most promising, promising technology on that front.
And this comes to us, I want to say May of last year. That's when the paper sort of hit.
I don't remember. The paper is about a year old.
Right.
I'm not sure. I don't remember the date exactly.
Sure. But it's relatively new, right?
Yes, but the idea that you'd have to run some protocol between the nodes so they can agree if transaction A or B is the correct one before the block is found is it's not a new idea actually, but that protocol is a significant technical step that allow to move in that direction. It's significantly better than every single proposal that existed on that front before.
Yeah, and I'm hearing that that as well. There's lots of excitement. I'm seeing more and more devs post about it. Some very in depth. Some just kind of trying to explain it to the lay public like me. So that sounds very, very promising. So just to kind of end here, how do you how do you relax? So like you're doing all this coding, you're constantly involved in now the silly politics of our space. What do you do that has nothing to do with like on a night where you're not in, you just don't want to think about coding. You don't want to think about Bitcoin Cash or cryptocurrency. What are like some of your hobbies? Like, do you shoot basketball? Do you play soccer? Like what do you do?
So most people are aware probably already, but I do speed cubing, which is like competition solving Rubik's Cube as fast as possible. Yeah, so I used to be very serious about it. It's 10 years ago now. So 10 years ago, I did the World Championship. I was, very serious about it. What happened during those 10 years, though, is that I'm as fast as I was at the time, but everybody else became much, much faster. I'm not, I'm not the one. So I do about 15-second average to give numbers.
Wow.
At the time in 2009, the best in the world, they were doing something like 12-second average, right? But no, the best in the world, they do 7-second average.
Jesus.
So they are literally twice as fast as I am now. So
Wow.
I'm not there anymore.
Slowing down, getting old. For my daughters, I have different permutations of the Rubik's Cube. And it keeps them going for hours on end. They can just sit there and try to make that work. It's a variation on algorithmic thinking, right?
There's some of that, but there's also a whole aspect that is very similar to juggling or magic. Like doing the move the right way, and it's a bit difficult to explain, but there is a very physical aspect to it.
Right.
I mean, maybe not physical in the sense of lifting or whatever, but physical more in the sense of agility and speed and being precise.
Very cool. And I know in the chat they were asking you for a reading list. So we'll leave with this. If there was one book that you could give to people that were, kind of getting into cryptocurrency and, maybe didn't want to, get too technical or what have you, just to kind of sort of explain the ethos or the overall way of thinking of crypto, what book would you recommend?
For crypto specifically, I don't know if there is such a book yet.
Sure.
At least I haven't read one. I mean, there are a lot of interesting books about crypto, but there is not. And I think mostly because people don't even agree on what that beast is. It's very new, and it's changing a lot of it essentially forced people to reconsider a bunch of ideas that they had about money and technology for a very long time. And so I'm not quite sure, like, and it's very clear if you look at the split with BTC and SV and Ethereum that you're also doing something completely different. It's very clear that people, some people, they say, okay, it's like gold, but computer gold, right? Digital gold. It's like for smart contract. So people have all kind of idea of what this technology is. But I would say probably if it's someone that is not really in the space and want to understand a bit about it, I would say probably free economics. It's a book about economics, but it's maybe not the most precise and informative book, but it's very fun. Yeah. It's studying the economics of drug cartel and this kind of stuff, for instance, like subject in economy, like it's like interesting subject and they look like, for instance, in the drug cartel case, they look at how the drug cartel are organized and how much money the different people working in the cartel are making and stuff like that. And then they explain the economics behind it and why, it's organized that way and why, this person is making so much money that this other person and, so on and so forth. And this is very interesting, right? They could present you the same thing with, graph and equation and whatever, and it would be very boring. But the way these books goes at it, it's actually teach you to look at various stuff that happen in life that seemingly don't have anything to do with economics, but actually they do. So
yeah,
that would be the book I would recommend, because it's fun and it gets you into the right mindset to understand economics question.
Yeah, and it seems, I think, too, economics has gotten a tad lost in becoming too econometric and less seeing sort of the human action side of things. And so Freakonomics...
so it's very much on the human action side of it. Also, economic has been a bit... I think this is probably one of the biggest aspect, like biggest positive point of cryptocurrency that people don't quite realize, is that it was very difficult for most of history to work on economic as a science, because it's very difficult to do experiments, right? Because you can say, okay, what happened when we do X? And then you're like, okay, when we do X, everybody is starving, right? So now you have a bunch of people and it's extremely unethical. So you really cannot do that. And even though sometimes some countries decide to do it anyway, what happened is that they don't do it in like a scientific manner, right? There is no control group. They take a bunch of measures, so then economists can argue forever which one actually caused everybody to starve, or which combination of one caused everybody to starve. And so that makes it very difficult to consider economic on a scientific side. But with cryptocurrency, we can do that actually. So, for instance, Bitcoin decided to make an experiment, right? Like an experiment is what happened when you limit the velocity of money to, a handful of transactions per second. Well, a bunch of stuff happened, right? And theory about what would happen, but no, we can run the experiment and things happen and nobody is starving to death, right? Like maybe some people lost some money, some people made some money, but overall the consequences are not dire in the way it would be if, say France decided, no, France is gonna do only 3 transactions per second, and we're gonna see how that goes.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's a great point. A really good point. And that kind of gets back to what we were talking about with the differences now in the chain split and some of these other ideas about crypto. You have a real life. It's very rare that life hands you kind of a clean control, right? So you can now historically look at how these projects work through, whether it's regulatory capture or smaller blocks, bigger blocks, the emphasis on mediums of exchange versus that of stores of value, people who want to lock down protocols versus people who are a little bit more open to innovation. We now have the experiment, right?
Yeah, and you also have some coins that are infinite inflation, like Dogecoin. You have some coins that have, finite supply, like Bitcoin's and a derivative. You have like all kind of crazy ideas, right? But
Yeah.
we're a bunch of data, and I think people working on economics academic, I guess, economists maybe, are gonna find a lot of raw material in there. It was happening a bit before cryptocurrency with massive online games. Things like EVE Online. You have no idea how many economic theses have been made based on EVE Online.
Right.
And for that very reason, right? Because you have this virtual world, right? So if everybody starve in some area in the virtual world, then that's not as big of a deal with, compared to people actually starving. And so there are all kinds of weird economic experiments that have been run in EVE Online, and there are scientific papers about them that are very interesting. And now we can, we can bring that to the next level. But that means like over the past, say, 20 years or so, economics is really stepping it's stepping in the space of being a science, right? And I find that very fascinating and very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It took a circuitous route, but it's slowly getting there. Wow. And just on that thought, when Bitcoin Core in late 2017 was skyrocketing and doubling, sometimes in price or in value, at least theoretically, my wife and I had Bitcoin Core, and it completely changed our spending habits without us even knowing it, because we thought, well, if we spend money on this plastic crap from China or this coffee or whatever, that's money that could have easily doubled, and so in the United States we have, again, relatively speaking, good money. So in other words, it's fairly stable, it's easy to use and whatever else. But it's also very inflationary, right? So we have to get rid of it fast. There's no incentive to save. We get paid, we have to spend it. They got to turn it into something of relative value. Whereas with Bitcoin, it was changing we became almost miserly, because then every purchase was like, wait a second. Why do you want to buy that? Whereas before, who gave a shit? You know what I mean? Like, we'll buy it, But now it was like, wait a second, that cost 300 Bitcoin. Hell no, or
yeah. I think that's one of the very positive change. I think this is this is one reason why currency that have a supply that is capped are probably gonna do better than the one that do not, because you have this effect. Like you want to hoard it, right? Because only 21 million of them. So there is this effect, and I think this is something like you see a lot of people, especially people that are sensible to ecological causes and stuff like that, and they see Bitcoin proof of work as a waste of resources and all that. But
right.
I would like to oppose what you're saying. Like right now, we have a huge consumerist society that exists mostly because people cannot save.
Right.
And I think it would change the behavior of mostly everybody, maybe not to the extent that it happened to you, the way you describe it, because you're probably more conscious about economics than most people are if you're in that space.
Sure.
But I would expect that to happen to most people that use this kind of currency to some extent.
It's gonna, if it does, gain adoption, it will definitely change habits. We saw just with, and then I'll wrap this up, but you got me thinking, with the advent of the Federal Reserve in the United States and sort of this turn in the early 20th century to central banking and the ease of credit, it would blow up these bubbles, and it does kind of change, or at least it's hard to know, which came first and which came second and what was truly influential there. But there's some anecdotal evidence to show that when people have, kind of free-flowing credit, it seems like it's going to last forever. Skirts kind of rise up, They tend to be a little bit more carefree. The moral part of the society, they tend to get a little bit more experimental. That sort of thing.
Yeah. This is there is a lot of study about it, more in biology actually. I don't know if you're familiar with the R and K selection theory.
And also evolutionary economists, right?
I'm less familiar with that word, but
that's okay. Go ahead.
Arca selection is like it's also evolutionary, and it's the evolutionary of species. So you have some species that are very abundant resources, and you have some other species that evolve in an environment where resources are pretty scarce, and you end up on very different evolutionary path, right? So the creatures that have very abundant resources are gonna usually have a lot of children, but not take care of them very much, and they're gonna reproduce very fast. But when there's disease or whatever, like 3/4 of them are gonna die essentially. Yeah, they become like very carefree and they reproduce a lot and consume a lot of resources, but they don't care because they have a lot of resources. And then you have the opposite side of it, where you're gonna have species that have few children but take great care of them, and take great care of their environment and don't reproduce like crazy because they live in constrained resources environment. And you kind of see the same happening with human beings to a lesser extent. Like humans are definitely a species that invest a lot in their children and don't have many of them, but you see that effect where when resources are abundant, people become more tolerant to risk and more carefree, and like exactly you were explaining. And this is what you see in those species in evolution. Though man is an interesting species because we can change our behavior. We're smart enough to adapt our behavior to a much greater extent than pretty much any other species that exist.
Right.
And so to the extent we can adapt to evolutionary pressure without having to wait for, like 20 generations or whatever the time it's going to take to select the right people.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and it will change how everybody looks at economics and their relationship to money, and that's that is at least the beginning of the discussion. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's already happening to some extent, but it's gonna become much bigger. I think it was very interesting. For instance, I saw a speech from Paul Krugman to some crypto conference recently, and that was very interesting to find Paul Krugman that have been saying that crypto was complete baloney since
right
beginning, and he's still saying it to some extent, but he's going at the conference now, so it at least cares enough to go to the conference and have a speech there, whereas he would have not even have responded to the invitation.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really, really good point. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. I would rather Paul Krugman go nowhere near it, but I got you. I just understand you. Very good. Wow, I told you half an hour, and I've taken you way beyond that. I really appreciate all of your time. And again, man, thank you so much for everything that you've done and that you continue to do for the Bitcoin Cash community. I know you're not really into the whole celebrity thing, and so dragging you on the show and everything, it's just another sacrifice.
It's fine. It's not like it's not. There are some people that get very anxious and stuff like that when they need to put themselves more publicly. This is not my case too much.
Right.
But it's not like my number one motivator.
Yeah. Well, very good. Best of luck to all that you do. Really looking forward to what the future holds for Bitcoin Cash, for Amaury Séchet, and for Bitcoin ABC and all that good stuff. And thanks again, man. And maybe we'll catch up in a few more months here. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to CoinSpice as well. You guys are you're doing like often quite hilarious stuff. I like it.